5 years after the 3rd precinct burned down during the BLM riots, Minneapolis cops are breaking their silence. In exclusive interviews with Blaze Media's national correspondent, Julio Rosas, they exposed the chaos, abandonment, and political failures since that night. So Julio joins us now. So let's go through this. Let's start with actually going through and tracking down these officers. How difficult was that? Were they just like, okay, you know what? It's been long enough, Julio. We'll go ahead and talk to you now.
Well, yeah, not to get into too much detail, but these officers have come to trust me, and they did so because they for one, they know that I was outside the 3rd precinct 5 years ago, which is hard to believe it's been that long. And they've obviously seen my coverage of the riots. They see my coverage of covering crime in the United States after the defund the police movement and after the rise in the Soros DAs and all that. And so they've been wanting to talk for a while, just because understandably they haven't been able to say much publicly. Obviously they talk amongst themselves and people that they trust and their families, but especially during that time, the narrative was so dead set against them, right? I mean, when the initial video of George Floyd came out, it was set in stone before these guys even realized what was happening and what was about to happen. And so the reason why these interviews were so, in my opinion, critical to understand what happened and what's happened since then is because these guys are still in the police department. A lot of the people that have spoken out since the riots are officers who are no longer in the department, which is why they have more freedom to speak publicly. But in my opinion, I think it's significant to hear from the unvarnished truth from people who are still dealing with the aftermath of these riots day to day, especially in a police department that's so heavily scrutinized locally and nationally.
And Julio, we will get into that aftermath, but there are a number of interesting aspects to these interviews. One of them being the fact that they weren't given reinforcements at the time all this was going on. Why do they believe that that was the case?
Yeah, I mean, again, speaking for, as someone who was out there, it was clear that they were not being reinforced. And so the natural conclusion, or one might assume, okay, well, they have the officers inside the 3rd precinct that they think is necessary to hold it, and the other officers in the police department have been staged around the city to in case more rioting or more looting breaks out in those areas. But what I can tell you is that there were officers who were stationed miles away, and in some cases outside the city. And that hearing that 5 years later is so crazy, because you would think, okay, well, if you're going to have officers not be at the 3rd precinct, at least have them inside the actual city limits, or not miles away, not on the complete opposite side of the city, who are doing nothing. I was told that there were cases where when these officers were ready to get onto their shift, who were not at the 3rd precinct, and they were getting ready to go, and they were given the order to go, and they're gearing up, and they're being told, no, what are you doing? They said, well, we thought we were going to the 3rd precinct. And they said, no, you're going home. And so it was a complete mismanagement of personnel. Again, obviously, are you going to send the entire police force to the 3rd precinct? No, but there could have been way more officers sent to help reinforce it. And they held it for a very long time against the odds. The reason why these officers told me that they thought that the leadership, the city and state leadership, made those decisions was because they wanted to give the rioters a sacrifice. Essentially, they wanted them to have this victory in the hopes of placating their anger, and in the hopes that, okay, you have the 3rd precinct, now just go home and stop your attacks, which of course is a completely idiotic line of thinking. But that's what ended up happening, right? And we saw the 5th precinct, which is actually on that same street, Lake Street in South Minneapolis. It's a couple miles to the west, and that was in danger of being overrun and being burned, because understandably, the rioters thought, oh, we conquered one station, let's go to the next and the next and the next. And if they didn't put their foot down at that point, the city leadership and the leadership within the police department, easily, the entire city could have been overwhelmed, and all police stations would have been set on fire.
Yeah, we actually have a clip, I know, of the overrun station, how they were trying to go through and demoralize and delegitimize some of the police. Let's go ahead and take a watch.
They said the moment the precinct was given up, they said you basically ripped the shoulder patches and the badges off of every cop in the city. You've completely delegitimized our job and our mission and what we do on the streets. You still, to this day, people blow through stop lines, stop lights with a squad right at the intersection because it's a complete disregard for the police officers.
And you guys can't really do anything about that.
No.
Julio, that's so impactful that even 5 years later, they're still seeing the ramifications there from those protests.
I saw that. I distinctly remember leaving my hotel after the third precinct was burned in downtown Minneapolis. So I was in downtown Minneapolis, making my way back south, and we're in the heart of the city, and this guy just rolls past a stoplight, and I remember that because I'm thinking, okay, well, yeah, people are seeing other people break the law in such a big way that, of course, that people who may not do that, they're just going to think, okay, well, I can just run through the stoplight. And believe it or not, I actually saw that a few times when I went back to Minneapolis to record these interviews. So, like, yeah, this is still very much a real thing, and it is, leads into the broken windows theory, where if you don't stop this, someone breaking a window, it's going to lead to, worse things. And so it is an absolute travesty, and it is just really just idiotic thinking from the city leadership and the state, with Governor Tim Walz, thinking that if they gave up a precinct that there weren't going to be any negative long-term effects. I understand that there was the concern of, well, we can't have an officer be killed, we can't have a member of the general public be killed, i.e. a rioter. But as soon as they gave up that precinct, and I've told you guys this before, it just sent the worst message that they could have sent to the rioters, which is, you do actually have this power to run us out of our own bases, our own stations. And we saw, and especially in the immediate aftermath, we saw kind of repeated instances in Seattle and Portland. And then, of course, then it's just the regular criminal element just became so emboldened after that. And so this is why it's important to really understand the failures that happened down there, especially hearing it from these guys, because the impacts were far reaching. And yeah, we're still very much dealing with that low intensity level, that low level intensity of lawlessness in a lot of cities across the country, just because what happened in Minneapolis was the turning point, and how policing is done in the United States. There is kind of a, because since the pendulum swung so far in one direction, it is kind of coming back, but only in some areas, right? Particularly, conservative areas, but especially in big liberal cities, 5 years later, I think it's safe to say that people haven't really woken up to how dumb these progressive policies that were being pushed at the time were.
So 60 seconds left. A question that I don't even want to ask, but I have to because I think I know the answer. Was anyone at all punished? I mean, it seems like the only thing that happened to Tim Walz was rewarded by being named a vice presidential candidate. But was there any sort of punishment or accountability for any of this 5 years later?
From the city and the officials? No. I mean, not that I'm aware of. I mean, it's just crazy because you're right, and that's why I asked about Walz to these officers, and they understandably they said, we know his leadership style, and especially in a moment of crisis, he completely failed to act decisively to try to get control of the city. And the mayor, Jacob Frey, he's actually running for a third term, and like a lot of cities, like a lot of liberal cities, they're stuck between this guy who's very weak, but he's considered the moderate, and then you have all these like people that are even further to the left that are basically communists that okay, well, you definitely don't want them in office. So kind of the moderate approach is, well, we're going to have to reelect this guy, even though he's far from what is needed. So from my perspective, and from especially what I've seen, take place in that city over the past 5 years, no one's really been held accountable.
I don't know when riot season will kick back up, but I do know that when it does, you'll be there. Julio Rosas, thanks so much.